Bay Area sports fans, thanks for tuning in. It's starting to feel like summer and things are heating up all over the Bay Area. We'll dive in today and always here on Silicon Sports Spectator. Welcome to Silicon Sports Spectator. I am Joe, your host. I gotta say, we're really getting into a good routine here, weekly episodes, really kind of seeing a path forward for how this podcast may grow. I appreciate feedback that I've gotten from friends and family on it. And I'd love to hear what you'd like to see more. We've had a couple interviews now. Love to see if we continue with that format or continue with the blended thing. All of that, that feedback is supremely helpful. Leave a comment. That always helps too. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about what works and what that doesn't work for this. You know, I think about this a lot too lately because something happened this last week that I'll say, I won't say I got emotional about it. It wasn't so much that, but it really got me thinking sort of about media careers and everything like that. And believe me, I'm well past the point of making this a career, but that was the end of ESPN's Around the Horn. So this show has been going on for over 20 years. They talk about almost 5,000 episodes. Tony Reali was the longtime host, not the original host, if you remember the Max Kellerman days. Tony Reali is a guy that, I'll say, I literally kind of grew up with him. He and I are the same age. He, of course, is famous for getting his start as that intern with Pardon the Interruption. All-time favorite show to this day. I watch it every single day. But Tony Reali, I have a great story about meeting him one time in Washington, D.C., where PTI was originally filmed. I was a recent college graduate myself, and he was, again, in his internship with ESPN in those early years. I was out there for a sport management conference in Washington, D.C., and Mike Wilbon was hosting a get-together for us students, kind of just a networking event, and was really interested to check that out. You know, again, I'm a big fan of the show, so I'm excited to meet Wilbon. And he was great. I remember to this day kind of talking about things. This is, again, just for time frame. This is probably 2005 is my guess. So, you know, this harkens back to the a long way. So the early days of PTI, early days of my professional career, and was in Washington, D.C., go to this networking event, meet Wilbon. He was great. Tony Kornheiser did not show up. I was kind of disappointed in that. At the time, too, what was going on in my career was that I was considering like a career in media relations. I actually had an internship with the San Jose SaberCats. Yes, the arena football team back then. I did some stuff with the San Jose Giants, some other stuff. Yeah, it's funny to think about a lot of those fun things that since they were just little flashes in the pan during my career. But anyways, I met Wilbon. It was a cool networking event. I felt really cool, you know, again, getting dressed up, and I'm at the studio where PTI is filmed. I didn't get to see it, but I was in the building though for it. We met up at like a restaurant or cafe or something like that. Me and, I don't know, maybe 50 students or so. And I was all excited to talk to Wilbon. But then Tony Reali, this intern who we knew from TV, and again, he was this fresh face, about the same age of us, graduate students. At the time, I was in this master's program for sport management, USF, go Dons. But ended up not staying in that program. But to me, this was very serious stuff at the time, in the sense of like, hey, I'm wanting to make networking connections in the industry, and meeting people from ESPN was great. Wilbon was a great mentor just for the quick time that I met him, and we were talking about journalism, some other just small talk. But Tony Reali was great because he was right there, again, living an internship with that. And I remember one is that he wasn't even billed to be at this networking event, but yet he showed up. And let me tell you, the line to talk to him was the most approachable. And again, he's just an intern. He doesn't, he wasn't super well known. I don't think people knew his name other than Stat Boy. People still call him that to this day. didn't have his own show certainly, but showed up as on screen time for just a little bit, and that gave him some cool factor. But I remember just him having this great energy, magnetic personality, and absolutely this long line of people wanting to chat with him, and he talked to every one of us, and it was just a really cool thing. And I just thought to myself, like, this is a guy that regardless of what he's going to do in his career, his personality was going to lead him to success. And it's no surprise at all that he had such a great run with Around the Horn. In retrospect, I'm not surprised at all. He had this great career. It's one that I'm anxious to see what he's going to do next. I've seen him, starting to toy with a YouTube channel. I think his contract with ESPN ends in August or something like that. Who knows if they're going to renew him or, give him some new tasks. I imagine he'll find something new. All anxious to see that. He's going to do great, though. Literally have kind of grown up with him over the years. We've kind of just grown up in that same era. And so, yeah, I felt a certain kinship with him, I'll say. And yeah, it really got me to appreciate. I did not watch Around the Horn regularly. Usually I would maybe catch the tail end of it just before tuning on to Pardon the Interruption, which came on right after it. There was things I did and didn't like about it. I always did appreciate that the fact they kind of, brought on these traditional media writers, onto that show, people who write for their local, newspaper, people like Woody Page, people like Dan Kalishaw, whoever. These are just names that we probably wouldn't know them if we never saw their face on Around the Horn. Yet, as professional journalists, I think they brought such a different perspective to ESPN, which you could see what the trend is now with ESPN. Kind of, hey, bring on these ex-athletes or these gorgeous faces, model good looks, because they, ESPN being this prized brand and so forth, but also character development, that they've done. But at the same time, they're not professional journalists in a lot of cases. And there's a difference in the quality of the content that you would get. You would get these great, deep, thoughtful takes, I think, from the professional journalists that would be featured on this Around the Horn game show. I guess we can kind of call it talk show. And competitive banter, I guess they called it. I like that, but they brought on a unique perspective. And then again, if you've ever watched the show, they would always end with whoever had the most points from their, takes during that show would have just a 30-second blurb of whatever topic they want to talk about. And so people would share these very, sometimes deep things, things that were going on with their lives, things that were important, sometimes sports related, sometimes not. And, but it just gave those journalists an opportunity just to give a platform to something that was important to them. Some of those, again, sometimes they were forgettable. So there have been times where it was really impactful, though. And it's something that, for 30 seconds even, like I would tend to catch that little blurb. And it's just too bad that the way that new media is working, anyone can kind of have a mic, and the ones that tend to get highlighted the most are not necessarily the best takes, but maybe the loudest. Yes, I know. And so says the guy who, bought a mic and without any training whatsoever is now bringing this fine sports coverage to you. I get it. But something is to be said for those traditional journalists and that how they were highlighted and showcased on Around the Horn. I always applauded that. And I think I'm going to miss it because I don't think we're going to see that type of thing. For one, traditional media is going away, just as the industry continues to evolve away from that. I think this podcast likes to pay homage to that traditional media brand. Here's what I'm thinking about. Like when I was a kid, like one of my favorite things to do, or part of my routine anyways, was reading the sports page, San Jose Mercury News, just at breakfast. I kept that that tradition all the way through college and that little bit after college. Now I don't do a traditional newspaper anymore, but I like that hyper local effect. That's why this podcast, that's why I talk about high school sports as well as the professional sports, all the things that are happening. That's sort of where my passion comes from. Is, hey, this is community news and what I try to bring. And I think there was a little bit of that element in Around the Horn. Like you would get Woody Page talking about LA or Mina Kimes talking about things up in Seattle, whatever the case may be. Their city was part of their identity. And, now with the national broadcast and so forth, it's kind of lost in a lot of ways. And I think what I try to do with this podcast is keep things. I'm not trying to reach out to every single region or appeal to them, but rather, hey, just for my Bay Area experience, and maybe you are a Bay Area expat, you've moved away, but you like this podcast for, keeping up with, because you don't get to see all your local teams or hear what's going on in terms of restaurants and all that. And those are the touches I try to bring, to this show. So that's all. It's, just, a big congratulations to the Around the Horn crew for what a cool experience, a show that they talked about, had more episodes than Oprah, more episodes than Jerry Springer, incredible over 2-decade run. It's going to be missed. And I don't think it's going to be something that can be easily replicated. But in some ways, the legacy does live on in shows like this. So thank you for your support. Think of Tony Reale and the Around the Horn crew whenever you tune in. All right, but let's get to some of the things that you are definitely here for, which is Bay Area sports news. Let's start with the Valkyries, all right? And a couple things going on with the Valkyries. So picking where we left off last week, the Valkyries had a big win over the LA Sparks. Carla Late, the Late Show, led the team coming off the bench, 19 points, earned her way into a starting role later on. She's looking very good. It was really funny in the post-game interviews after that game. Carla Late is from France and does not speak English very well. And so she's getting interviewed, and she had to call one of her teammates over to help translate and everything, both the questions and her responses. So that was a really cool one to watch. I just love, getting to know this team and their personalities a little bit. Other significant thing about the Sparks game in particular was it was nice, that I think it was an important one for Natalie Nakase, our coach for the Valkyries. She has a big SoCal connection. She went to UCLA. She's from Huntington Beach originally. So that was all really cool to learn about them. After the victory over the LA Sparks, Valkyries hit the road and played a back-to-back against the reigning champion New York Liberty. This is a powerhouse team. First game of that series, of that short series, we had a blowout loss. I won't even go into a lot of detail about it. The one positive takeaway from that was Kayla Thornton last year was on the New York Liberty, and of course, as the reigning champions, she got to receive her championship ring there in New York. So kind of a cool celebration for her, that night. Second game of this back-to-back just completed tonight on Thursday. And it was a close one. It was, especially after a 30-point blowout in that first match, I was really worried that this was going to be just another really tough loss. But I'll give the Valkyries credit. They bounced back and looked great. They played strong defense. Their offense showed up. And this game was back and forth till really the final possession. And unfortunately, New York ended up getting that really critical play that would have put the possibility of the Valkyries going ahead with just a matter of seconds left, and they couldn't inbound the ball. The Valkyries couldn't. And with that late turnover, it just became a fouling game, and New York Liberty emerged as victors. One more thought, and just watching the New York Liberty, they are just a powerhouse team. It gave me a lot of hope that the fact that we were able to hang with them in the second game. I don't think we were very prepared for that first game, and just props to the Liberty for just firing on all cylinders. They were hitting anything and everything in that first game. And the second one, I think, put forth a great effort. The Valkyries were able to kind of match that energy, and both sides of the ball looked pretty good. One of the stars on the New York Liberty, of course, is Sabrina Ionescu, who is from the Bay Area, from Miramonte High School, and ended up her college career up in Oregon. I'm going to make a little hot take right now, and that is Sabrina is going to be a free agent at the end of this year. Her contract expires. Now, there's no reason to point to why she wouldn't re-sign with the New York Liberty. She'll be competing for championships and everything like that. Can I just say that maybe our owners who make a phone call and our GM, for the Valkyries, make a call and perhaps get in on the Sabrina Ionescu stakes. Appeal to the fact that, she has these Bay Area ties. She's close buddies with Steph Curry, all those things. Steph, again, is a GM in his own right. As we know, maybe he can do some recruiting for that. I'd love to see, picking up a star player. But I think that's something that both our ownership and certainly our fans, just as we're, beginning to build an identity and build a culture here. Having a star player like that, I think we can find a place for her. So how cool would that be? Again, nothing to suggest that that's going to happen, but other than I think it's worth a phone call. Next up for the Valkyries, come on back to the Bay Area, but it is for the Commissioner's Cup. That's an in-season tournament. We were talking a lot about those last week. And then the WNBA, they have the Commissioner's Cup. And of course, our first match coming right off of two really difficult games against the championship New York Liberty. We now face in the Commissioner's Cup. The first match is the Minnesota Lynx. They were the runners-up to the New York Liberty in the championship last year, but also the Minnesota Lynx won this Commissioner's Cup last year in the mid-season tournament. So this is going to be a really tough match. They're top of the standings right now. I don't think they've even had a loss yet. So they and the New York Liberty remain undefeated, whereas the Valkyries are now 2-3 after their loss today to the Liberty. One other thing to keep in mind too, as far as the WNBA goes, is of course the gravitational pull that star Caitlin Clark has. Caitlin Clark just went down with an injury where she's going to be out 2 weeks or so. That's bad for the WNBA. Her games are all nationally televised. And maybe that gives an opportunity for people to still tune in. Hopefully they still will. I think it's going to be harder to draw, but let's tell this is the Fever are supposed to come to the Chase Center in June. Forget the exact date. Now, Caitlin Clark, they haven't given an official return date yet. However, it could be something that the timeline that they suggested was 2 weeks. I think that kind of puts it, back mid-June or so. And I think the game against the Fever comes in like late June. I was reluctant to buy tickets because of this uncertainty. No surprise that tickets for the Indiana Fever game are super high, whereas you can get in for under $50 to most Valkyries games. Just to give you an idea, the Fever games were going about $300 a ticket, today. Now, this is before injuries happened, so I'm going to be kind of monitoring that, see if it kind of dips, but you don't want to necessarily pay top dollar if you're not going to see the big act, so to speak, when she comes to town. Hopefully that her recovery goes smooth. Caitlin's does, and she'll be able to join us at Chase Center for what would be a really cool matchup. Sticking with the ladies, Bay FC. They faced the Houston Dash last weekend, came to a 2-2 draw. Fortunately, Houston had a late equalizer. This was a cool game. I got to watch most of it. Bay FC, Penelope Hawking had the candidate for goal of the week. Our netminder, Jordan Silkowitz, had a nomination for a save of the week. A good performance all around. I was really disappointed that they gave up this late goal. Unfortunately, to make it a draw. Again, hanging in there. I think they're looking better. Still outside the playoff picture, but kind of right on the cusp there. So I think if we can, turn some of these draws into wins, that we'll be able to move up in the standings. The last thing about the Bay FC is that they're starting to host these watch parties around the Bay Area. I haven't got the chance to check them out yet, but I hope you do. For instance, for their last game, they had 3 different parties all in different corners of the Bay Area. They met at Taplin's down in Santa Clara. They met at J-Town Pizza in San Jose, and they met at Morgan Territory Brewing in Pleasant Hill. It's a place that I've been and definitely have enjoyed my time there. But check them out. One of these watch parties, especially when they're on the road, and hang out with cool fans, support local businesses, all that. I also learned about too that there's going to be a new bar popping up in San Francisco. It's in the Castro, and this is Ricky's Bar. Ricky's Bar is a really unique concept. It's almost startling to think why isn't this a thing or whatever, but it's a women's sports bar, and that's how they advertise it. And it hasn't opened yet. It's going to be opening in the Castro here imminently, here in the month of June. So watch for that, and that will be a great place to watch Valkyries games, Bay FC. Their concept there is a female-friendly atmosphere, but they're going to focus on showcasing women's sports. So even though I don't fit that direct demographic, I'm really interested to go to the Castro and check that out. Yeah, not my usual haunt, but at the same time, I'm kind of curious about how this concept looks, and who doesn't want to hang with a bunch of rowdy ladies here in San Francisco? All right, that's Ricky's RIKKI bar showing up in the Castro in the month of June. I guess we'll talk a little bit about our men's sports teams here a little bit, starting with the Earthquakes. The Earthquakes also played a Houston team. We played the Houston Dynamo. First with the Houston Dynamo match, Quakes also had a 3-3 draw with them. Preston Judd was nominated for team of the match. And then just yesterday, we had on the road the California Classico down in Los Angeles. This is our big rivalry with LA Galaxy. The Earthquakes emerged victorious with a 1-0 win. Useni Buddha had the game winner in that. He came off the bench, substituted in the 66th minute, and then scored in the 74th minute. So instant impact there. How cool was that? Earl Edwards Jr. was named man of the match with his clean sheet appearance as our netminder in that one. It was definitely tested and kept us in a very close game. So congrats to the Quakes beating their rivals. We'll also have the Stanford Stadium California Classico coming up at the end of June. So that's another one. A lot of cool ticket deals going on for that one. So bring the family to that one. It'll be a cool one. That's at Stanford Stadium at the end of June. Going back to the Quakes playing the Houston Dynamo, what this brought up was an old memory about the Houston Dynamo and its connection to San Jose. I don't know if you remember this or even know about this, but the San Jose Earthquakes, one of the star franchises really for the MLS throughout its history. A couple championships, winning the MLS Cup in 2001, 2003, but they've always had attendance problems despite a strong soccer community here. Now, part of that, especially in the early years, this is before PayPal Park, right? And in the early 2000s, there's a lot to unpack here about this, but the fundamental reason was that Earthquakes ended up leaving the Bay Area and San Jose because they didn't have a stadium at the time. This was in the early years of the MLS. Early 2000s, and the ownership group at the time were not able to get a stadium, so the team ceased operation, ended up moving, and became the Houston Dynamo. This is 2005 or so when they moved. Get this, though. This is where I had kind of forgotten some of the history about this. So the context for this, too, was in 2005, when they ended up, was their final season in San Jose, the Earthquakes. They had the best record in the league. They came off their best year. Again, they won the championship in 2003. This is kind of happening in the Landon Donovan era. He was not our only star player then, but was one of certainly the most recognizable at that time. Shout out to my buddy Mike, who named his kid Landon after Landon Donovan. But no, get this. So after San Jose decides to leave town, primarily because they weren't able to get a stadium deal, in those years, they were playing at San Jose State's Spartan Stadium and not drawing well, even though they were winning championships. But the Earthquakes moved to Houston. And get this, in Houston Dynamo, their first two seasons, 06 and 07, guess what? With the San Jose roster, they won back-to-back championships. Yes, this franchise that moved from San Jose wins these back-to-back titles. And it's like, oh, this should have been ours. And then not long after that, the Earthquakes would reemerge as an expansion team. Okay, so while Houston is winning what I think are our championships in those early 2000s or so, San Jose ends up getting a new stadium deal, which would become PayPal Park. New owners. At the time, it was Lou Wolf. Very dedicated to the Bay Area. Unfortunately, he sold to John Fisher, and things have kind of got looking sour again. But no, we were able to get a new expansion franchise. We've had some good years in PayPal, no championships yet. Yeah, it's too bad missing out on a couple of those championships. And as I was preparing to tell this particular story, I was looking around for kind of a good chronicle of this, and it's over a 20-year period. So it was kind of hard to find some material on it. There wasn't as much YouTube coverage, but I'm going to give a shout out to fellow podcasters. Check out the Designated Players podcast. They run an MLS based podcast. They covered this story in great detail. It's where I got a lot of information about it. Shout out to them and their episode. Maybe even in the show notes, I can link to their podcast in this particular show where they talk about the history of the original Earthquakes becoming the Houston Dynamo and then the San Jose subsequent return as an expansion franchise. Check them out, the Designated Players MLS podcast. Thanks, guys, for covering that. Hopefully we'll get a chance to maybe have you on the show sometime. Next up, some quick hockey news. The last few weeks or so, we've been talking about the minor league playoffs. We talked a little bit about the NHL playoffs, but also the International Ice Hockey Federation World Cup. And, there were a couple of our Shark players and coaches have been participating in that. Well, guess what? If you didn't catch it, the United States of America won gold. In that tournament, they have not won that since the 1930s. So it's been 90 plus years since they took gold in this particular tournament. And what's cool about this is Team USA was being coached by the Sharks head coach, Ryan Warsofsky. Will Smith is on the roster, young rookie star for the Sharks, played great, getting great experience in this tournament, playing along other NHL leaders. How cool is that for Team USA to emerge victorious in that tournament? Another quick note, just out of Sharks camp as we approach the draft, getting little signings here and there. Just yesterday, Shakir Magumadulin, who I'm a big fan of, young defenseman, still a teenager too, I believe. I think he's only 19, maybe 20 years old. Just re-signed a one-year deal with us. So I like that. I kind of almost wish that we'd sign him a little bit longer because I feel like he did prove himself. Came on super strong late in the season till an injury forced him. I think he broke his leg late in the season. And it was too bad because he is starting to really solidify himself. He's this really tall defenseman. I forget exactly how tall. I want to say maybe like 6'6" or something like that. A little lean at the same time, but again, he's a teenager. So I think he'll put on some weight and muscle. I think if he continues to on his current trajectory, he can be a pretty solid contributor at the NHL level. So he was one that we got in the Timo Meier trade with New Jersey a couple years ago. By the way, shout out to Timo Meier, who was one of the absolute stars in this World Cup of Hockey tournament. I forget how many goals he ended up with, but I think it was among the lead there across the entire tournaments. But again, Shakir was kind of our big prize piece that we got aside from the draft picks that we got in that trade. He was getting some solid minutes late in the season for us, and I think he has a place with us. Last note about hockey, just because it became official tonight, and that is we're going to have in the finals a rematch of last year. The Edmonton Oilers will be taking on the Florida Panthers in the NHL finals. For Bay Area fans, I don't know if you're plan on tuning in here, but this really, I'm so excited for this final for a couple of reasons. One, you get to see the best player in the world, Connor McDavid, playing for the Edmonton Oilers. He is just something to behold. In the closeout game tonight, he had one of the prettiest goals that you'll ever see, a breakaway. He's the fastest skater that we've ever seen, and it is just incredible. Not only just to be that fast of a skater, but are as talented as he is. If you'll recall, this is a rematch against Florida, the Oilers and the Panthers, playing again, a rematch of last year's finals. Last year it was crazy where again, Florida takes a commanding 3-0 lead in that series, and then Edmonton comes back and forces a Game 7, wins 3 wins in a row. And that Game 7, just they were out of energy, and Florida emerged victorious. I am so excited to see this rematch because really these teams, very different styles of play. They're both teams are playing at peak levels right now, especially Edmonton, this offensive juggernaut, and Florida being this scrappy, tough team. This really imposes their will. I can't wait to see this. It's an exciting matchup. Not exactly the most exciting of hockey markets, but ignore that and just watch for the pure talent and everything. And the drama, connecting it to last year where, again, this very say back and forth roller coaster series. We'll see how that goes. My pick for this series, on paper, it's hard to go against Florida. I think they really are the more well-rounded team, but there's just something about, I think Edmonton kind of has an emotional edge here. I think they know that they can compete here. They're playing well and healthy right now. For the most part, they did have a key injury in Zach Hyman. He was their top scorer last year in the playoffs, top goal scorer, which is it's a big loss, for them. But all in all, I think that they. I think they just something about the emotional edge in the NHL where when we've had these repeat finals and so forth, what's happened the last couple of times when this scenario has unfolded is that the champion the second time around is different from the first time. For example, I think the last time this happened was with the Pittsburgh Penguins facing the Detroit Red Wings in kind of the late 2000s. Detroit won the first time they faced, win the cup. And then when they played the second time in as many years, it was the opposite. The Penguins emerged and beat out the Red Wings. This also happened in Wayne Gretzky's early part of his career when the first time that they made the finals, they lost to the dynasty New York Islanders. And then in the following year, Edmonton won its first cup against those same Islanders at the end of their dynasty. I think there was maybe 2 other examples too where that happened. I just can't think of who it was, but you can see, I don't know, there's great parity in the NHL. I just have this feeling that the Edmonton Oilers can get it off. But regardless, I think it's going to be a fantastic series. I plan to tune in for every single game. I hope you do too. All right, let's rattle off a couple quick things about what's happening with the 49ers. The nice thing with the 49ers is that it's, especially as they just kicked off OTAs, there really hasn't been much news. And I almost think like after kind of a crazy off season, that this is a drama-free OTA, or, heading into camp and everything is kind of the perfect thing, is like what you want. Really, the big and only news was that they signed a new punter, Thomas Morstead, which, again, not a big deal. But what's nice is that they had everyone show up just about for these OTAs. There weren't any holdouts or anything like that. They said Trent Williams wasn't there, but I don't think that was a contract issue or injury or anything like that. The big action items, signing Brock Purdy to a deal, signing Kittle, signing Fred Warner and all that. Like all that was taken care of. Those contracts aren't hanging over the heads. Like we can just move forward and focus on football. Christian McCaffrey being healthy again, him participating already in OTAs and everything. I think it's going to be a great bounce back season, for the Niners. We talked a little bit in earlier episodes about how we think that they stock up. Can't get much worse than last year, so we're going to only be looking up. Watch out for that. Let's end here just on a few baseball notes. We're a third of the way through the baseball season. Maybe it's a good time to kind of reflect on where we are with our Giants and everything. The Giants are into the third leg of a very long road trip. They had 9 games, or they will have had 9 games on the road here. Just got swept by the Detroit Tigers, having a great season, and the Tigers just sweeping the Giants in a tough 3-game series. It's really too bad because, what's happening with the Giants right now is really hitting some offensive struggles right now. And whatever, the dog days of summer, I guess. And heading into, a new part of the season. Next up for them, they place Miami on the road in a 3-game series, and then they headed back to a 4-game series against their division rivals with the San Diego Padres. That's going to be a critical series for them, and hopefully their offense will begin to spark up. The nice thing is, in terms of timing, is that we are getting Gerard Encarnacion back. He's our right fielder. He had surgery earlier this year. That'll be a nice offensive boost, or at least we hope. It certainly comes at a good time. So I think he should be back and just in time for the Padres series when we return home. Also getting on the mend is Justin Verlander, who has been had a rehab start, or is planning on having a rehab start here soon. So anxious to see how that goes. One other interesting development here too is that closer Ryan Walker has had some struggles here this year and unfortunately lost his starting role. Gone back to Camilo Doval. So Camilo Doval is having a great season. I think he's earned his way back into this position, and so we'll see. So we'll definitely have to watch if still one of the coolest entrances for any closing pitcher. Last quick note about the Giants was, maybe this doesn't matter in the big scheme of things, but have you heard they picked a new team anthem? Okay, and this was, I don't even know when or how they're going to play this, or if it's just a pure commercial and marketing thing. I sense that's what it is. I don't know. Maybe not my cup of tea type thing. I'm just a cranky old man who, don't like the kids' new music these days. For one, I don't even know what this type of anthem is used for, but I expect we'll be hearing it more at the park. I harken back to, as an A's fan anyways, where these unofficial team anthems kind of became part of the culture. And for example, I remember with Cocoa Crisp and the Bernie Lean, for example, like they didn't set out to, that wasn't a marketing thing, that just became part of the team's identity, and the fans really got into it, with the whole dance and everything. Or even like with another example from the A's is like when they did the Call Me Maybe, which, how annoying of a song is that? At the same time, like fans really got into it. And I think it was somewhat unique to the ballpark, and you wouldn't expect it to be so popular, but it was a fan favorite. Everything. I like those more organic movements, I'll say, that come out, where the fans kind of just naturally gravitate towards these songs, as opposed to this like forced, hey, let's get the marketing team together to create a new anthem for us. And even if it's meaning, and it was produced by a Bay Area artist and all that, that's all fine and dandy, but it was like the gift that no one really expected or wanted or asked for. So we'll see if it grows on me, but right now I'm sort of scratching my head on it. That Giants new anthem. A quick Warriors update is just the only small note is Brandon Pajemski just had wrist surgery, should be back in time for training camp, no problem there. But I will end, unfortunately, on a very sad note, actually, for Warriors fans, actually, and that is today we learned of the passing of Rocco Thompson. Yes, Klay's beloved bulldog, English bulldog, Rocco, who we knew for the last 13 years. That dog has been around, and how much Klay loved and showcased that dog. I always loved interviews where people talking about Klay, who's kind of this quiet, mysterious guy. It's like he loved his boat and he loved his dog. And that was Klay Thompson there for you. So obviously probably a hard time for him right now, losing a beloved pet and everything like that. But, too, he was part of the Bay Area culture as well. So Rocco, you were a good boy. For the rest of you fans, you too, good boys and girls out there, thank you for tuning in as always. If you haven't, hit the bell, like, subscribe, do all the things, put a comment. All those things sort of legitimize my efforts here, make me feel good about myself in my midlife crisis. So do all those things. I thank you for your support. Thanks always for tuning in and learning about the fan experience here in the Bay Area on Silicon Sports Spectator. I'm Joe. Play my anthem.